David Schwartz does not waste words. So when the chief technology officer of Ripple, the person who architected the XRP Ledger from the ground up, sits down and writes a public post describing a scenario where an exchange demands millions of dollars to list XRP, collects the payment, generates 20% of their total revenue from that asset, and then hands those payment records directly to a federal litigation team the moment legal pressure gives them cover, you have to ask yourself one question. Why is the CTO of a $15 billion company writing this? He is not venting. He is not speculating. The litigation is over. Ripple won. And David Schwartz is putting the record on the public ledger permanently, in his own words, because the record should exist. And what he revealed goes far beyond one exchange. It goes directly to the price logic that institutions have been running quietly for years. The math that explains why XRP cannot stay at current prices if it fulfills its designed function. And the institutional timeline that is now activating in Q2 of this year. Before we go any further, if you held XRP through the Coinbase delisting, through the SEC lawsuit, through 3 years of watching your portfolio frozen while institutions accumulated on the other side, drop held in the comments. If you bought during that window because you understood what was happening, drop accumulated. I want to see who in this community stayed through the period that was designed to shake you out. This is not financial advice. I am sharing publicly available information for educational purposes. Always do your own research. Welcome back. I am the Calm Analyst. Around here, we cover what institutions are doing before retail finds out. Today, we're going deep on the Schwartz revelation, the real reason behind the Coinbase delisting, the price math that institutions have already run, and the Q2 activation timeline that connects all of it. Let's get into it. Let me walk you through what David Schwartz actually described, because the details are specific and the implications are enormous. An exchange knew that listing XRP was in their best financial interest. They listed it, but only after extracting a payment from Ripple. XRP immediately became 20% of that exchange's total revenue. Then, when the SEC filed its lawsuit in December 2020, that same exchange delisted XRP within days and handed those payment records directly to the litigation team. That exchange is Coinbase. The lawsuit is the one that just ended with Ripple winning, and the delisting is why millions of retail investors spent 3 years watching their positions frozen, while institutions on the other side of that lawsuit were quietly accumulating at suppressed prices. But here's the part that makes this worse. Bob Way, a former Ripple insider, confirmed the deeper motivation directly. Coinbase had studied the XRP ledger and reached one conclusion. The native, decentralized exchange built into that ledger had the long-term capability to make centralized exchanges obsolete. Not weaker, not less competitive, obsolete. Think about what that means. Coinbase looked at XRP, recognized it as an existential threat to their business model, demanded a financial barrier to entry, collected the payment, listed the asset, watched it generate a fifth of their total revenue, and then the moment legal pressure gave them cover, they used that same payment as evidence against the company that built it. And they got 3 years of XRP sitting at suppressed prices while institutional buyers accumulated at a discount. That is not a business dispute. That is understanding the sequence of events for what it actually was. And it tells us something critical about the price XRP needs to reach before the institutions are willing to fully activate it. If this is the first time you're hearing the real story behind the delisting, smash that like button, because this is the version of events that was never supposed to be understood this clearly by retail. Now let me walk you through the price math that David Schwartz described publicly, because this is where the conversation shifts from history to architecture. Schwartz stated this directly. XRP cannot be dirt cheap. Not as a price prediction, as a mathematical constraint. And here is what that actually means. If XRP is priced at $1 and a major institution needs to move $1 billion through a payment corridor, they need 1 billion tokens tied up in that transaction, even temporarily. That creates congestion. It creates a bottleneck. It defeats the entire purpose of using XRP as a bridge asset. The system chokes. Raise the price to $100. The same $1 billion transaction requires 10 million tokens. Manageable, efficient, fast. Raise it to $1,000. You need 1 million tokens. That is what a high-throughput global payment system actually looks like. The settlement layer is liquid, fast, and uncongested. This is not speculation. This is the liquidity architecture that the BIS, the IMF, and every institution building on distributed ledger technology has modeled. The price of the bridge asset is not a side effect of adoption. It is a precondition for adoption. The system literally does not work at scale unless the bridge asset is priced high enough to handle the throughput without bottlenecking. So when people say $100 is just the beginning, they are correct. But not because of hype. Because at $100, the utility math starts to work for mid-tier institutional payment flows. The banks running trillion-dollar corridors need something higher, and the velocity model that Mason Verslauis published, showing that $1 trillion in daily cross-border volume requires approximately $1,000 per XRP to maintain system liquidity, is the same math Schwartz is describing from the engineering side. The price is not a prediction. It is a design requirement. Now let me connect this to the tokenization argument, because this is where the price math meets the real-world infrastructure being built right now. BlackRock's head of digital assets, Robbie Mitchnick, said it directly in a recorded session. Eventually, all assets will be tokenized. And his qualifier was telling. He said you don't have to believe it's 100% certain to place serious bets around it. You only need to believe it's a material probability. That is institutional language for, we are already positioned, and we are not waiting for retail to catch up. BNY Mellon's CEO offered the institutional counterweight. Not everything should be tokenized simply because it can be. His point was more specific than it sounds. Tokenizing a share of a stock and calling it innovation changes nothing. But tokenizing a bond, with its full legal indenture encoded on-chain, the payment triggers, the default conditions, the if-then clauses, that is a fundamentally different instrument that creates genuine value. The assets that benefit most from tokenization are the complex ones: real estate, bonds, cross-border trade finance, structured credit. These are also the highest volume, highest value asset classes in the global financial system, and they all require a settlement layer, a bridge. The DTCC settles $2.15 quadrillion in securities transactions annually. They have been running distributed ledger pilots for years. Their Project Ion tested blockchain-based equity settlement at scale. If tokenized securities begin settling across a distributed ledger using XRP as the bridge asset, the transaction volume alone demands a price in the hundreds or thousands to avoid the congestion problem Schwartz described. Nasdaq is targeting Q3 2026 for tokenized stock rollout. The New York Stock Exchange is partnering with Securitize for 24/7 tokenized trading. Securitize is already using RLUSD on the XRP Ledger. The DTCC has a 3-year tokenization pilot active. Every piece of this infrastructure is converging on the same timeline. Comment below. Do you believe the institutions are already fully positioned in XRP or still accumulating? Type positioned or accumulating. One word. I read every single response. And the answers in this community are usually more accurate than the analyst reports. Now let me walk through the institutional timeline, because the dates are no longer abstract. The OCC introduced new digital asset amendments on April 1, 2026, the first day of Q2. The regulatory framework that would allow institutions to integrate digital asset settlement into federally regulated banking infrastructure is being finalized during the same quarter that multiple analysts have identified as the activation window. Ripple's bank charter application is active. The Clarity Act markup is targeting the second half of April in the Senate Banking Committee. Garlinghouse predicted passage by end of May. 7 spot XRP ETFs are live, with $1.44 billion in cumulative inflows. Goldman Sachs disclosed $153.8 million across 4 XRP funds. BNY Mellon, managing over $49 trillion in assets under custody, is the primary custodian of RLUSD and is onboarding Ripple Prime for tokenized deposits. Their CEO is on record saying the industry is early, but moving fast. Swift's global payments framework is targeting a live launch with 25-plus payment corridors by mid-year. At least 30 of the 50 banks building that framework are Ripple partners. The routing architecture puts XRP inside the settlement infrastructure of 11,000 banks across 200 countries. Ripple Prime's revenue has already tripled since the Hidden Road acquisition. Ripple Treasury processes $13 trillion per year in corporate payments, all in fiat, and Garlinghouse called the migration to crypto rails the biggest untapped opportunity in finance. This is the institutional architecture that was being built while retail was locked out, while the SEC lawsuit dragged through the courts, while Coinbase kept XRP delisted, while the price sat at levels that made accumulation cheap for anyone with the patience and the access to buy. The question is not whether this infrastructure is real. It is already real. The question is whether you understood what was being built before this activation window opened. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, drop a lock in the comments, because Q2 and Q3 of 2026 are the windows that everything has been building toward. The OCC amendments are live. The Clarity Act is weeks away. The tokenization pipelines are launching. The institutional infrastructure is activating. And every video on this channel is built around one question. What do the institutions know that retail does not? Now let me give you the three-tier holder reality, because the math needs to be personal for it to matter. If you're holding 1,000 XRP at current prices, you're participating. At $100, the institutional utility floor where mid-tier flows become efficient, that position is worth $100,000. At $1,000, where the velocity math says daily volume of $1 trillion requires the price to be for system liquidity, it's $1 million. If you're holding 5,000 XRP, you're in the range where the tokenization wave and federal payment rail integration create a position that most retail investors will not reach before the supply squeeze begins. You're in the top 5% of all XRP wallets on the ledger. The institutional mandate rotation, the ETF flows, the Clarity Act, every catalyst compounds the value of that position. If you're holding 10,000 XRP or more, you made a decision that most people around you thought was irrational for years. The institutions building this infrastructure made the same decision at scale. That alignment is not accidental. Now let me be direct about the honest risks, because you deserve the complete picture. The gap between Ripple winning and XRP winning is real. Banks can settle in RLUSD and fiat without touching the XRP token. That is already happening. Deutsche Bank and Societe Generale started using Ripple's infrastructure in early 2026 and settled in RLUSD and fiat, not XRP. The $13 trillion flowing through Ripple Treasury is flowing in fiat, not crypto. The bridge that closes that gap is the Clarity Act. Without it, banks default to stablecoins because the legal risk of using a volatile token for fiduciary settlement is too high. With it, XRP becomes a legally cleared option for on-demand liquidity. That is the single most important catalyst in the entire thesis. Everything else, the DTCC integration, the tokenization pipeline, the SWIFT routing, the velocity math, all of it depends on regulatory clarity giving institutions the legal permission to use XRP directly. Standard Chartered's honest bear case without the Clarity Act is $2.80. With it, their bull case is $8 near term and $28 by 2030. The spread between those two scenarios, $2.80 versus $28, is entirely determined by one bill passing through one committee in one building in Washington. That is the risk. And that is also the opportunity. Because if you believe the Clarity Act passes, and Garlinghouse, Polymarket at 72%, and the bipartisan Senate language all suggest it will, then the current price of $1.34, with fear and greed at 8, is the accumulation window that the institutions on the other side of this thesis have been using for the last 3 years. Let me say something directly to the holder who has been patient through all of this. You watched Coinbase delist XRP. You watched the SEC lawsuit drag for 3 years. You watched analysts call it a dead asset. You watched Bitcoin get the headlines, the ETF approvals, the corporate treasury allocations, while XRP sat in limbo. And the entire time, the institutions that filed the lawsuit, the exchange that delisted the asset, the analysts who dismissed it, they were all watching the same infrastructure being built that you were watching. They were not confused. They were not uncertain. They were managing the timeline. The suppression of XRP's price over the last 4 years was not a regulatory accident. The SEC lawsuit gave Coinbase cover to delist. The delisting gave institutional buyers 3 years of discounted accumulation. The resolution of the lawsuit cleared the legal path for the federal integration now scheduled for Q2 and Q3. And David Schwartz just put the entire sequence on the public record because the litigation is over and the truth should exist permanently. You did not miss the wave. You held through the period that was designed to make you sell. And the institutions that designed that timeline are not your allies, but their schedule is now working in your favor because the activation window they built for themselves is the same window you are positioned for. The frustrating part is almost over. What comes after the frustration is why you stayed. Price is a distraction. Value is the reality. Structure is what matters. And the structure that David Schwartz helped architect, the XRP Ledger, the bridge function, the settlement layer designed for institutional scale throughput, is the same structure that every institution we've named is now building on top of. From the DTCC to BNY Mellon to SWIFT to BlackRock to NASDAQ. The CTO did not waste his words, and the institutions did not waste their time. The question is whether you will waste the window. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. Remember, haste leads to loss, while calm analysis leads to victory. If you made it to the end of this one, you now understand the real Coinbase story, the Schwartz price logic, the institutional timeline, and the honest risks. Comment, calm analyst below. Let me see who stayed for the complete picture. And share this with one person who sold XRP during the delisting window and doesn't know what was actually happening behind the scenes. They deserve to understand the full sequence before the next phase begins. Like, subscribe, notifications on. I'll see you in the next one. Stay patient, stay rational, and as we always do, we don't wait for the future, we plan for it. Peace.